You know that moment when someone humiliates you so casually they're sure you'll just swallow it and move on? That was me, standing in Crescent Bank, asking for a simple $100 to buy groceries for my elderly neighbor, only to have my own sister, the branch manager, call me a beggar loud enough for the whole lobby to hear. They all stared like I'd wandered into the wrong life. What none of them knew was this. The nobody she tried to shame was the silent owner of a multi-billion-dollar fund. And the next time I walked into that bank, I wasn't there for $100. I walked into Crescent Bank that morning with one simple goal: withdraw $100 so Mrs. Hutchins, my elderly neighbor, could buy groceries. That was it. Nothing dramatic. Nothing complicated. Just kindness in cash form. The downtown branch smelled like eucalyptus and cold marble, the kind of place where everyone pretends they're richer than they are. I stood in line, scarf tucked under my chin, hands still numb from the November air rolling in off the Ohio River. I should have felt invisible. Most days, I was. But then I heard the sharp click of heels and the too familiar sweetness in a voice that always carried poison. Well, look who wandered in. My sister. The branch manager. Dressed in winter white like she owned the entire financial district. She didn't lower her voice. She never did. Still using this branch, Celine? We updated our client tiers. We don't really serve walk-ins anymore. She paused, letting the room turn toward us. Especially not beggars. The word landed like a slap. Loud, bright, humiliating. A man in a navy suit glanced up. An older woman adjusted her purse, suddenly curious. My throat tightened. But I didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting. I just stood there, feeling every stare crawl across my skin. I thought about explaining, telling her the money wasn't even for me. But explanations never mattered to Vera. They only fed her pride. So I did what she never expected. I stepped out of line, calm and steady. No tears. No scene. I walked past her without a word, letting the silence sting her harder than anything I could have said. And the whole bank watched as her power slipped, just a little, when she couldn't make me break. I didn't argue. I didn't give her the scene she wanted. Instead, I stepped out of the line, my boots barely whispering against the polished floor, and walked straight toward the doors. Each step felt strangely steady, like my body had already decided what my mind hadn't caught up to yet. The lobby hummed with fluorescent light and muted whispers, but all of it faded behind me as I pushed into the cold afternoon outside. The air hit me sharp and clean, the way winter air in the Midwest always does, like it's daring you to breathe deeper, stand taller. I pulled my scarf tighter around my neck, the wine-red fabric warm against my skin, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel ashamed. I felt done. There was something final about the way the glass doors shut behind me, sealing me out of a place that had never really welcomed me anyway. People inside might have still been staring, replaying Vera's smug little performance, but none of it mattered anymore. Not to me. Because that quiet walk out of Crescent Bank was the last time, the very last time, I let anyone reduce me, shrink me, treat me like I was lucky to take up space. I'd spent years swallowing humiliation, convincing myself that silence was the safest choice. But as the wind brushed against my face and the city buzzed around me, I realized something powerful. Silence doesn't have to mean surrender. Sometimes, it means preparation. And that day, stepping onto the frosted sidewalk of downtown Cincinnati, I knew, deep in my bones, that I would never be that version of myself again. When I finally got home, the apartment felt quieter than usual, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I kicked off my boots, tossed my scarf onto the arm of the couch, and pulled my old laptop from beneath the cushion where I always hid it. The thing looked harmless, dented at the corners, stickers peeling, but once I powered it on, the screen glowed with a cold, familiar light. I rested my fingertips on the keyboard for a second, letting the muscle memory settle in. Then I entered the first passcode, the second, and finally the encrypted phrase only 2 people on this planet knew. The system unlocked with a soft chime, clean, precise, almost surgical. There it was. The interface RA and I had built years ago, back when everyone thought I'd fallen off the map. A private digital architecture woven through layers of anonymity and offshore compliance. The kind of system that didn't exist unless you already knew where to look. My username flashed in the corner, Dove. A joke at first. Something Ra called me after I patched a broken security module the way I once nursed an injured bird as a kid. But it stuck. And eventually, that name became the signature behind one of the most quietly powerful financial structures in the country. Shellcode 7. A fund no one could trace, no board could override, and absolutely no one in my family had ever imagined I controlled. Seeing the dashboard again felt like slipping into a second skin, a life I'd built in silence while they dismissed me as the girl who'd never amount to anything. I clicked into the core accounts, and the numbers rolled across the screen like a heartbeat. Mind. All of it. Hidden in plain sight. And tonight, after what happened at the bank, I knew exactly why I'd kept it that way. When I was younger, my family treated my ambitions like a running joke. Every time I mentioned wanting to work in fintech, designing security systems, building something real, someone at the table would snort or raise an eyebrow, like I'd just announced I wanted to become a space cowboy. My father once tossed my resume aside without even glancing at it, muttering that I should aim for something realistic, while my sisters traded looks that said, "See? She still doesn't get it." It didn't matter how carefully I explained my plans, or how late I stayed up, studying code on a borrowed laptop. To them, I was the quiet one, the forgettable one, the girl who should stay in her lane and be grateful for whatever scraps life handed her. They didn't see potential. They saw a convenient punching bag, wrapped in politeness. So one winter, after a particularly sharp round of laughter over my internship applications, I packed a single suitcase and slipped out before sunrise. No shouting match, no dramatic exit. Just a decision. If they wouldn't make room for me, I'd build a world where I didn't have to ask. I moved to a tiny studio in Phoenix, worked 2 part-time jobs, and rebuilt my confidence piece by piece. I learned to code past midnight, drank cheap coffee, and kept my dreams quiet, not out of shame, but strategy. The less they knew, the less they could sabotage. And slowly, almost invisibly, I built a career no one in my family could touch. A career they didn't even know existed. A life shaped by the very dreams they once called ridiculous. Funny thing is, stepping away wasn't running. It was the first time I'd ever walked toward myself. I still remember the night RA, and I created what would eventually become Shellcode 7. It didn't happen in some glossy Silicon Valley office, or under the glow of Wall Street skylines. It happened in a cramped studio in Phoenix, with 2 laptops, takeout containers stacked like trophies of exhaustion, and a single idea big enough to survive every door that had ever been slammed in my face. We built the fund layer by layer, country by country, weaving through regulatory frameworks, like we were stitching a bulletproof vest. Ra handled capital and negotiations. I handled the architecture, the encryption, the quiet parts no one ever sees but everyone depends on. By year 2, the structure was airtight, the legal trails clean, and the board, what little of it there was, voted exactly as we intended. That was the moment I became the controlling shareholder. Not by inheritance, not by favoritism, but by sheer, methodical design. When I logged into the system that first night, the numbers blinked back at me like a secret finally choosing to speak. $3.50 billion in liquid assets. A figure heavy enough to reshape entire institutions, including one that had once laughed me out of its lobby. And the irony? The funniest, coldest twist of all? Vera's Bank, the same branch where she called me a beggar in front of strangers, had been holding a portion of Shellcode 7's liquidity for months, hosting it proudly, hoarding it desperately, never realizing the girl she tried to humiliate was the one signing off on every transfer that kept her quarterly metrics alive. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just waits, quiet, patient, and smiling, until someone hands it the perfect moment to speak. I kept hearing her voice, sharp, practiced, dripping with the kind of cruelty only someone who thinks they'll never be held accountable can wield. "We don't serve beggars here." The words followed me out of the bank, down the icy sidewalk, all the way home to my tiny apartment overlooking the Ohio River. I'd swallowed insults from my family my whole life, but something cracked open inside me that day. Not loudly. Quietly, like a lock finally clicking free. I hung my scarf on the hook by the door, took a slow breath, and opened the laptop I kept tucked beneath the couch cushion. The screen's glow filled the room, cold and familiar, like the start of a ritual. My fingers hovered for a moment, before moving across the keyboard, each keystroke steady, deliberate. 3 layers of encrypted logins, a rotating code, and then the phrase only 2 people in the world knew. The system opened instantly, sleek, dangerous mine. Vera had no idea the bank she lorded over had spent the past year courting a silent mega-client. Or that the client was me, Shellcode Holdings, wrapped behind enough fiduciary layers to make the IRS sweat. I stared at the dashboard, at the digits she'd never imagined I could control, and felt the last trace of doubt burn off like fog under morning sun. If she thought I was a beggar, then fine. I'd let her see exactly who she'd turned away. I clicked into the scheduling portal, selected her branch, and typed 2 words that would split her world open. Shellcode Holdings, in-person appointment. Then I hit confirm, leaned back in my chair, and let the silence settle. This time it wasn't surrender. It was the beginning. The next morning, I walked back into the bank, not as the girl my sister mocked, but as the authorized representative of Shellcode Holdings. The air inside felt colder than yesterday, the kind of sharp, conditioned chill big banks use to remind you who they think has power. I handed my ID folio to the receptionist, and the moment she scanned it, the entire system seemed to inhale. A red VIP alert pulsed across her monitor. Another screen lit up behind the counter. Someone near the loan desk stood up a little too fast. You can always tell when a bank's internal protocols kick in. The room doesn't get louder, it gets quiet. Controlled, and minimal. Calculated. And suddenly, everyone understood I wasn't here for $100. Within seconds the branch manager appeared, silver-haired, steady, wearing that corporate calm they train into executives. He took one look at the authorization code, linked to my identity, and his expression shifted in a way he couldn't hide. "Ma'am, just to confirm," he said carefully, "your entity has initiated a primary withdrawal request for $3.5 billion. The system automatically triggered a compliance lockdown. We'll need to secure the lobby." Behind him, the security doors clicked. 2 associates stopped mid-conversation. Even the hum of the printer seemed to stall. I simply nodded. For years, Vera thought she could define me. A nobody, a burden, someone who should aim lower. But now her own branch was freezing operations because I was moving funds her team had been begging to manage. And she still didn't know it was me who held the authority to drain every cent. Standing there in the center of that polished Cincinnati branch, I felt something settle inside me. Not revenge, not triumph. Recognition. I finally saw myself the way they should have seen me all along. I stood there in the middle of the lobby, the hum of printers and soft jazz fading into a strange, suspended silence. Every banker, every customer waiting in line, every person who'd watched Vera sneer at me the day before, every single one of them froze when the manager read the authorization tied to my name. Shellcode Holdings. Primary owner. Full withdrawal right. Vera blinked at the screen, then at me, the color draining from her face like someone had pulled a plug. You're lying," she whispered, but her voice cracked. I took one step forward. "No, you've actually been working for me, indirectly, for years. All that swagger, all that power you thought you had?" I nodded at the screen. "It belonged to me the whole time." A gasp came from somewhere behind the teller line. The young intern near the printer covered her mouth. Vera's knees buckled. She dropped so fast the sound of her heels hitting the marble echoed through the branch. She grabbed onto the edge of my coat like it might save her. "Celine, please," she choked out, mascara already smudging. "Don't do this. Don't ruin my life. You don't understand what this will cost me. My career, my child. Please, I'm begging you." For a moment, I just looked at her. This woman who had spent years belittling me, cutting me out of rooms, calling me worthless when no one was listening and when everyone was. Then, I let out a slow breath. "I'm not ruining your life," I said quietly, my voice carrying in the stillness. "You did that yourself." I just stepped aside so everyone could finally see it. Her hands loosened. Her eyes widened in something between realization and despair. And the entire bank watched the truth settle on her shoulders, heavy, undeniable, and earned. I remember the way the elevator hummed as it carried me to the executive floor, smooth, weightless, almost ceremonial. When the doors slid open, a junior assistant was already waiting for me, standing a little too straight, eyes wide like she'd just been told a ghost was coming. "Ms. Dove, right this way." She led me down a quiet corridor lined with framed photographs of past board members, men in tailored suits, women with practiced smiles, all of them carved into the institution like marble fixtures. And then there was me, stepping into a space no one in my family ever imagined I'd reach. The investor lounge was colder than I expected, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Cincinnati, leather chairs arranged like a negotiation circle, a tray of untouched sparkling water sweating on the table. The room shifted as I walked in. Every executive stood. Not one of them looked confused. They already knew my name, my authority, my signature on the Shell Code 7 account. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt correct. Like this was the room my life had been steering toward while everyone else insisted I was lost. The door behind me burst open. Vera stood there, still in her manager's blazer, mascara smudged from whatever panic had swallowed her downstairs. She tried to speak, but the compliance officer stepped in front of her, lifting a hand like a quiet verdict. "Ms. Hawthorne," he said evenly, "you no longer have clearance for this level." The look on her face, shock collapsing into recognition, was almost gentle compared to the years she'd spent diminishing me. And me? I didn't gloat. I simply took my seat at the head of the table, the place reserved for the person in control of the capital. For once, power didn't feel loud. It felt earned. That night, my phone lit up with Clarice's name, followed naturally by George's. I knew before I even answered what their voices would sound like. Soft, sugary, the kind of concern people use when they're really just trying to read the numbers behind your eyes. "So," Clarice cooed, stretching my name like taffy, "we've been so worried. You've been busy, haven't you?" Busy? That was her word for it. Busy as in, we saw the financial transfers. "How rich are you really? And how much of it can we reach?" George chimed in right on cue, his tone trying to land somewhere between friendly and investor slick. "Yeah, kiddo, we just wanted to check in. Clarice mentioned you've been working on some private projects. Maybe we could all sit down, talk through a few opportunities." Opportunities. I almost laughed. That was always the tell. He only said opportunities when he smelled money the way a realtor smells fresh paint. I leaned back in my chair, letting their eagerness spill through the speaker before I cut it clean. "It's funny," I said lightly. "My phone only seems to ring when there's a dollar sign attached. Never for birthdays, never for holidays, just business." Silence. The kind that lands heavy. George cleared his throat. "That's not fair, Actually," I interrupted gently, "it's perfectly fair. And no, I'm not looking at investments right now. My lane's pretty full." Clarice tried again, sweetness cracking at the edges. "We just want to make sure you're okay." "I am," I said. "And I'll stay that way, as long as I'm not being treated like a walking balance sheet." I ended the call before either of them could pretend it was ever about anything else. Through Carmen, I found out something that didn't surprise me, but still hit with a cold, satisfying clarity. Vera had officially been locked out of all executive-level access. No more backdoor approvals, no quiet overrides, no pretending she understood the system she'd spent years weaponizing against everyone else. For the first time, she was on the outside looking in, exactly where she'd always tried to place me. That same afternoon, my phone lit up with a flurry of messages from the family group chat I hadn't opened in months. Suddenly they wanted a nice dinner, a chance to reconnect, just the girls together again. The language was warm, carefully worded, almost sweet. But it tasted artificial, like store-bought cookies pretending to be homemade. People who once forgot my existence were now tripping over themselves to book a reservation. I agreed, but not because I believed a single word of it. I said yes the way you say yes to a meeting you already know the outcome of. I wanted to see who would actually show up, whose smile would crack first, and which questions they'd circle before landing on the real reason I'd been summoned. When I texted Carmen that I'd accepted, she replied with a single line, "Good. They need to learn what happens when you stop being the quiet one." That made me smile. Not the triumphant kind, just a small, steady acknowledgement that a shift had already happened. By the time dinner came around, I wasn't walking into a reconciliation. I was walking into a room full of people who finally realized I had something they'd never bothered to see before: choice. At that family dinner, our first in years, the air felt staged, like everyone had rehearsed their lines in the car before walking in. Clarice opened with her usual sugary nonsense, George chimed in with fake warmth, and my mother kept touching the pearls at her throat like they were some kind of moral support. I let them talk. I let them pretend. I let them circle the same empty small talk they'd always used to avoid seeing me. Then, when the table finally settled, I set my water glass down and asked, almost casually, "Did any of you ever wonder what happened to grandfather's Pennsylvania land trust?" The shift was instant, like someone pulled the plug on the room. Forks froze midair. Clarice's smile twitched. George stiffened. Even my mother's eyes darted up, sharp and worried. I reached into my bag and slid a slim folder onto the table. "It's still active," I said. "And I'm the controlling beneficiary." No theatrics. No raised voice. Just the truth spreading across the linen like a quiet shockwave. Clarice snatched the folder first, flipping through the pages until her face drained of color. George leaned in, jaw dropping slightly. My mother whispered something, maybe my name, maybe a prayer, but no one dared break the silence fully. For the first time in my life, they weren't looking at me like the family burden. They were looking at me like someone they had underestimated so completely it almost embarrassed them. When the server returned with the check and asked, "All together or separate?" I didn't even glance up. "Separate," I said, standing and smoothing my jacket. "Everyone covers their own tonight." And just like that, I walked out, not as the forgotten daughter, but as someone who no longer needed a seat at their table. The next morning, I took the private elevator down to the archival floor, a place most people in the bank didn't even know existed. The air was cool and dry, smelling faintly of paper, metal, and old promises. I walked into the boardroom with a steady heartbeat and a folder under my arm, the kind that carried more weight than any raised voice ever could. When I laid the documents on the table, the room went still. "As of today," I said, my voice calm but unyielding, "the Pennsylvania Legacy Trust is officially merged into the bank's primary foundation platform. Under its charter, I am the sole controlling beneficiary." Nobody argued. Nobody even shifted. They knew exactly what that meant. Years of hidden amendments, whispered assumptions, and quiet erasures had just snapped into alignment, and every signature in that trust now pointed back to me. Then the door burst open. Clarice swept in like she owned the building, heels clicking fast, face tight with the kind of panic she thought she could disguise as authority. "Celine, what the hell are you?" She didn't finish. A member of the legal team stepped forward, a slim envelope in hand. "Mrs. Whitford," he said, formal to the bone. Clarice blinked at the envelope, then tore it open with shaky fingers. Her eyes skimmed the page once, twice. The color drained right out of her. "Effective immediately," the attorney recited. "You are removed from your fiduciary position for ethics violations and retaliatory misconduct." Clarice looked up at me, stunned, furious, and frightened all at once. But, for the first time in our lives, she had no script left to hide behind, only consequences she never expected to face. I stood at the head of the long oak table, the kind polished so many times it practically reflected every hesitation in the room. But I wasn't hesitating, not anymore. The board members waited, some leaning back like they'd already predicted a storm, others leaning forward as if they could feel the shift humming under the carpet. I set my palms down gently, grounding myself. "This ends today," I said, my voice steady in a way that even surprised me. "The favoritism, the backdoor promotions, the families hiring cousins who can't run a spreadsheet. It's over. From this point forward, every position in this institution will be earned, not inherited." A few brows lifted. One man cleared his throat like he wasn't sure whether to object or applaud. "And the community funds?" I continued. "We're auditing every single one, top to bottom. If a dollar was misused, we'll trace it. If a promise was broken, we'll repair it. Our reputation won't be built on who we know, but on what we uphold." The room fell still, the kind of stillness that comes right before a building exhales. I straightened, sliding the final folder across the table. "I didn't come here to take everything back," I said, meeting each pair of eyes. "I'm reclaiming only what was erased, what was mine before someone decided I didn't deserve a name in the paperwork." Someone at the far end murmured, "Fair enough." I allowed myself a small breath. Not triumph, just clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting to be seen. I was setting the record straight, not with rage, but with precision. And as the board quietly nodded, one by one, I realized something simple and profound. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. That night, I found a single envelope on the floor just inside my apartment door. No knock, no footsteps in the hallway, just my mother's handwriting staring back at me like a ghost I wasn't ready to meet. I carried it to the kitchen table, the one place in my home where truth never had anywhere to hide, and sat for a long moment before opening it. Inside was her confession, quiet, deliberate, written in the tight script she used when she wanted things to look controlled. She told me she had seen it all the day I was 10, standing at the end of the driveway with my little cardboard lemonade stand. She had watched Clarice, accidentally, topple the jug before I sold a single cup. She wrote that she knew exactly what my sister was doing back then, and chose silence anyway. Then came the part that hit harder than anything Vera ever said to me. My mother admitted she had struck a deal with George years later, trading her voice for financial stability, letting him and Clarice steer decisions that should have been mine. She wrote that she told herself it was to protect the family, but now understood it only meant she hadn't protected me. Her final lines were the ones that made the air shift in my apartment. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Celine. I know I have no right to it, but please, don't become the very thing that hurt you." I sat there, the letter trembling just slightly between my fingers, listening to the radiator hum, and the soft rain tapping against the window. For the first time in years, my mother's voice sounded honest. And honesty, even this late, was its own kind of wound. I sat there with my grandfather's old savings book resting in my hands, the pages soft from age, the corners curled the way paper does when it's carried through too many storms. Tucked in the back was his note, the one I'd forgotten existed. "One day she'll need to know she mattered to someone." His handwriting was steady, like he'd known exactly who I would become long before I did. That line echoed through me, clearer than any apology I never received. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what my family had taken. I was thinking about what I still had, my name, my voice, my choices, and how badly I wanted them back. So I used the assets I'd spent half a lifetime building and established something of my own, a nonprofit designed to protect the kind of people who get overlooked, stepped on, or talked over. People who remind me of the girl I used to be. The money was just the first part. The real investment was pulling my loyalty, my love, and every quiet piece of myself out of the hands that never valued it. I put it where it belonged. The morning I signed the final papers, I walked to the small park near the new office. The air smelled like cut grass, and the sunlight slipped through the oak branches in thin, warm stripes. I sat on a bench still damp with dew, and let the weight of everything finally settle. A tiny bird hopped onto the ground beside me, close enough that I could hear the soft rustle of its wings. It didn't startle. It didn't expect anything. It just existed, peaceful, unbothered, free. For the first time in a long while, I realized I was too. I left the park bench when the sun climbed higher, tucking my grandfather's savings book back into my bag like a promise I'd finally kept. The nonprofit sign gleamed softly across the lawn, my name printed beneath it, small but real. I walked toward the building, not as someone begging for a seat at anyone's table, but as the woman who built her own. Behind me, the little bird fluttered up into the branches and vanished into the light. For once, I didn't feel left behind. I felt exactly where I was meant to be. And if there's one thing I want you to take from all of this, it's this. You are never what they call you when they're trying to keep you small. You're what you choose to build once you finally walk away.